If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members.
Consider this scenario. It's 8:46 in the morning on September 11th, 2001. American Airlines Flight 11 hits the North Tower. 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 hits the South Tower. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 hits the Pentagon. At 10:03, United Airlines Flight 93, bound for the U.S. Capitol, goes down in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after passengers storm the cockpit. In the first 77 minutes, 2,977 Americans are dead. 10 days later, British Metropolitan Police raid a Saudi operative's home in Birmingham, England, and seize boxes of evidence, videos, notebooks, a hand-drawn aircraft sketch with descent calculations, phone books packed with Al-Qaeda contacts, and senior Saudi government officials, diagrams of planes hitting buildings as well. They handed it all to the FBI. That was September 21st, 2001. Fast forward 25 years, the 9/11 Commission never saw most of it. FBI field agents in San Diego and New York never knew it existed. The families of nearly 3,000 murdered Americans had been begging, suing, and fighting Congress for 2 decades to get their hands on what the Bureau had sitting in a box near the Beltway the entire time. Tonight, a federal judge has done what no administration in Washington was willing to do. He looked at the full body of evidence and ruled that the 9/11 family's civil lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, accusing the Saudi government of directly funding and facilitating the attacks, has sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. After 25 years of sovereign immunity claims, dismissed motions, and buried evidence, the kingdom is out of places to hide. And Terry Strada is done waiting. The primary enemy system driving this cover-up is the multinational NGO political influence network, specifically the Saudi government's operational apparatus inside the United States, which ran its Ministry of Islamic Affairs as an anti-American influence and logistics machine out of the Washington, D.C. embassy, embedded intelligence operatives with fabricated credentials into American mosques and consulates, funded the hijackers' entire support network on U.S. soil, and then spent hundreds of millions of dollars on Washington lobbyists and K Street influence operations to bury that fact permanently. This is how state-sponsored terrorism survives in the open, not through force, but through institutional capture. They poured cash into congressional campaigns, hired over 24 lobbying firms, and leaned on successive administrations to invoke state secrets and privileges against the very families they helped destroy. What they want is permanent immunity, a world where a foreign government can fund the mass murder of Americans, then spend its way out of accountability inside our own capital. That's going to end in a federal courtroom. It's March 24th, 2026. Welcome to Survival Dispatch News. I'm Chris Evan, the CEO of Survival Dispatch. And tonight we have one of the most important guests the show has ever hosted. Terry Strada, National Chair of 9/11 Families United, joins Khalid Muhammad and myself tonight to expose what Washington spent 25 years hiding. Bottom line up front, you can call it justice delayed. The 9/11 Saudi cover-up finally goes to court. After 25 years of stonewalling, the families of nearly 3,000 murdered Americans are finally getting their day in court. And the evidence proves the Saudi government didn't just look the other way. They were directly in on it. Why does it matter? Well, the Saudi government directly funded and facilitated the September 11th attacks on American soil. The FBI had the evidence within 10 days of the attack, buried it, refused lawful subpoenas, and never gave it to the 9/11 Commission. And with coordinated attacks now threatening American cities again, every real American, TM Randy Nantz, needs to understand how deep this institutional rot goes. So what we're covering tonight is the complete timeline from the 2002 lawsuit through Operation Encore, through the MPS evidence the FBI refused to produce, the federal ruling that sent the case to trial, Saudi Arabia's ongoing appeal, and what Terry Strada's fight means for every American whose government chose a foreign kingdom over 3,000 murdered citizens. So we're going to dive directly into segment number one, the institutional betrayal architecture. The families filed suit against Saudi Arabia in 2002 were blocked by sovereign immunity for 7 years. They fought for the passage of JASTA, J-A-S-T-A, for another 7 years until it was finally enacted in 2016, then faced lawful subpoenas to the FBI and other agencies that were simply ignored. In Operation Encore, the FBI's own 10-year secret investigation into Saudi links to the hijackers was shut down by senior FBI officials in New York before its findings were ever fully disclosed. The FBI's refusal to share the British Metropolitan Police evidence with its own field agents, the 9/11 Commission, and the CIA was not an oversight. An FBI storage facility near the Beltway held Bayoumy's boxes for years. And when an investigator located them and called the Bureau, the evidence was never put to use and the FBI refused to investigate further. What the families have now through direct MPS production, federal court depositions, and Judge Daniels' ruling is a complete power shift map showing how a foreign government's intelligence assets operated inside America with near total institutional protection for a quarter of a century. Unbelievable stuff. Let me get Khalid and Terry up on screen here. So Terry, coming to you first, walk us through the complete timeline from the 30,000-foot view, the 2002 lawsuit, the sovereign immunity, 7 years denied, JASTA enacted, then Operation Encore shut down before it could finish the job. And maybe let us know along that journey, what point you realized this was not a bureaucratic failure, but deliberate protection.
Right. So that came pretty soon after we started the lawsuit. So in 2002, we filed a lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Saudi officials, charities, banks, a whole array of things from the kingdom, and for the role that it played in supplying Al-Qaeda with the funds it needed, and then also for the attacks, the aiding and abetting, and the logistical support of the two arriving hijackers. That was the ruling from the court, that we could only have this very narrow jurisdictional discovery. But in order to get there, like you said, it took 7 years. Kingdom was being dismissed on sovereign immunity. There is an exception to the Foreign Sovereignty Immunity Act of 1976 that no one is entitled to immunity if they're involved in a terrorist attack. The courts kept misinterpreting that law and saying that the entire tort had to happen on U.S. soil. We argued, they said that only let me get this one straight, that the entire tort had to happen on U.S. soil. We argued that no, if the funding or the planning comes outside of our borders, we can still hold that nation accountable. We could hold a nation accountable that was on the designated terrorist list. We could sue Iran, which we did, for their role. We could sue Sudan for their role. But because the kingdom was not on this designated terrorist organization list, they thought that they could be immune from a lawsuit. So what JASTA did, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, when we went to Congress and said that they are misinterpreting the law, or it's a flaw in the law, however you want to look at it, and they agreed to amend it so that only the tort had to happen, and that if you were giving the money outside of the borders or the planning outside of the borders, you could still be held responsible. It also codified the Anti-Terrorism Act of 1991 on the aiding and abetting. That also needed a slight fix to it. It took 7 years, 3 different Congresses. It failed in the first Congress. When I say failed, was not enacted. We have a Congress that runs every 2 years. Every 2 years, every bill that is still has not been voted on dies on the vine, and you have to start all over again. So I got involved the second time that JASTA was introduced, and we started to build up a coalition and support for it. And it came out of the Senate Judiciary Committee unanimously, then it came out of the Senate unanimously, but it was very late in the year, and the House didn't bring it up for a vote. So then we go now into this third Congress. And when we get into the third Congress is when we really have to ramp up the support in the House and really get the House on board, because the Senate has already voted it out once. They brought it back up again mid to late September, I guess maybe summer of 2016. And that's when we really had to pressure the House and get them on board as well. So ended up that the Senate voted it out unanimously again. We were able to get the House to bring it up, and they voted unanimously out of the House. So now it's going to President Obama for his signature. He was signaling that he was going to veto it, but we were praying and trying our hardest to get him to understand, the value of the bill, why we needed it, and the harm that it would do if he did veto the bill. He didn't listen. He would not have a meeting with any of us. He would not meet with members of Congress. And he sent out his veto message, and it was very difficult because it really almost didn't align with the actual language of the bill, but he did it. So we had to go back to Congress very quickly and ask them if they would come back together one more time for a veto override. And this was in 2016 when it was an election year. Congress pretty much wanted to go home and start campaigning, but Mitch McConnell came out and said, we're going to hold the vote. And then we got the speaker on board as well. He agreed to hold the veto override before they left for this break. We knew if the break happened, we were going to lose our momentum. So thankfully they agreed. And for the veto override, it was 97-0-1 in the Senate and 348-77. So it was an overwhelming veto override. And it was the one and only veto override of President Obama's entire tenure as president. That gave us the legal standing to go back into the courtroom and have JASTA, now the law, applied correctly, and that they were not going to be dismissed on sovereign immunity. Immediately following that is when the judge took their time to review everything, and it came back that they were not going to be dismissed from the case and that they were going to stand in the case for us to move forward. And that's when the very narrow jurisdictional discovery came about on the first two arriving hijackers. And immediately subpoenas were sent to the FBI, CIA, NSA, probably all these intelligence agencies who wanted to start seeing, the evidence that they'd collected over the years. Still, we don't know anything about this MPS in its entirety, what was there. We knew a little bit about it because they had manipulated what they gave to the 9/11 Commission to show an entirely different story than what actually happened in some of the evidence. So the FBI has never fully complied with the subpoena. They did give some of the information. I mean, there's things we have that were very good, but most of the time it's an incomplete set of documents, or just there's categories that they've completely ignored altogether. So that makes it very difficult to go into a courtroom with some of the evidence, not all of the evidence. And it's very unfair to do to the people that have been harmed. They've overly abused the state secrets doctrine. You're only allowed to use state secrets if there's a threat to national security. And everything that's been declassified that they had state secrets on over the years was never a threat to national security. So they abused that. They overly classify things. They took some documents back that were declassified and started classifying them. I mean, they just were not cooperative. So President Biden came into office, and we went to the administration, and they agreed to do an executive order. In between that and the subpoena, we'd gone back to Congress and asked them to do a Transparency Act, and they agreed. And we thought, okay, with this Transparency Act, Congress is going to be on board and they're going to mandate it. And actually, Congress has been on our side and helped us quite a bit. We never would have had JASTA without Congress, and they were going to ensure that the Transparency Act was going to be enacted as well. The Biden administration knew that was coming, so they decided to do the executive order instead. And it was a declassification process to go back and review all of these documents and declassify them to the greatest extent possible. Again, okay, great. We've got cooperation from an administration. However, they don't fully cooperate, and the administration stops communicating with us, and they stop working with us to actually enforce the entire executive order. And also, President Biden at that point is the one and first president to see evidence that was never seen before, and he should have been addressing it with the kingdom, but he failed to do that as well. So you're right. In this time, we learned about a secret investigation called Operation Encore that the FBI had handled or had started in like 2004 or 5, I think. And yes, you're correct in saying that it got shut down before it was completed. And one of the agents was able to type out and get a 2016 or 16-page memo into the record before it was shut down. And if I'm correct in believing that that memo was what gave us the catalyst for the actual whole Operation Encore investigation. However, it's heavily redacted. Excuse me. So these are just the problems that we've run into, and we're still in it.
How many times have you told that timeline now, Terry?
Too many, absolutely too many. It's a travesty.
Yeah, so maybe we should just back up a little bit for a couple of things. Your husband, Tom, was on the 104th floor, is that correct, of the North Tower when the plane hit?
Yes, correct, he was, and he was able to call me after the plane hit. I call that phone call both a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing, I think, for him to be able to reach me, a curse for me because I will carry that fear and pain for the rest of my life, and I could hear so much commotion and noise in the background, and they were frantic. It was a very frantic phone call, and he was with a group of people, and they were going to the stairwell, and they were going to try to get out. But as we all know, or as I've learned, there was no stairwells left in the North Tower, so there was no way to go down. The doors were locked to the roof, so there was no going up to the roof, and all of that wouldn't have mattered anyway, as we know, with the towers, collapsing. But it was horrible.
Yeah, I can't even think of the right words to say, Terry. So just for our audience's benefit, JASTA is the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act that Terry spoke to, and which essentially the biggest part of it is it removes the protection of sovereign immunity from other countries. And whenever you've heard me or you hear Khalid or Terry mention MPS, that's the Metropolitan Police Services, which is in Great Britain, which has provided more evidence than our own authorities have, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. Khalid, give me your thoughts on the FBI, being served with lawful subpoenas from the families, from the families' attorneys, and they haven't complied. This isn't once or twice. I mean, this is multiple times. Are there any legal tools that can force a federal agency to comply, or can they just thumb their nose at it and nothing come of it? And like in Terry's case, in the 9/11 families, thankfully they found alternate means to get the evidence they needed.
Well, Chris, the problem with federal agencies is they can always invoke the sovereign immunity clause, because the U.S. government always looks at it from the point of view is we don't want to offend a friendly country. And Saudi Arabia, no matter how unfriendly they really are to the United States, the U.S. considers them a friendly country because of the billions of dollars, the trillions of dollars they invest in the defense industry, in real estate, in U.S. bonds. So they don't want to do anything to upset the Saudis, which has been one of the reasons why terrorism has been able to increase in the way it has across the world. What Terry was able to do was to find a loophole to get around sovereign immunity, to create a new law to be able to prosecute the countries or the people that are supporting terrorism. Now, you'd almost think that the material support of terrorism would cover that. But again, when the U.S. government says, well, no, we're not going to play nice with you, it doesn't matter if you're a U.S. citizen or a foreign national, the laws don't work in your favor because it protects the government itself. And it comes back to that question of is the U.S. government really protecting the people of the United States or protecting the government of the United States? Because what they did with the 9/11, we've harped on this so many times. That you never really did an investigation into 9/11. We still don't really know what happened on 9/11. There are too many questions. There are too many red flags that exist on that day and before that day that no one has ever bothered to look into as to why this happened. How did this happen? And what Terry's been able to do is fantastic from the point of view is you've broken through the federal shell that's been able to protect these crimes that have happened against the American people. Hopefully, at some point, we get a U.S. government that actually protects the people of the United States in the face of terrorism. Because as long as you let countries off the hook, you are creating more and more opportunities. It's like I said the other night, when the airspace was closed on 9/11, the only plane that was allowed to leave was the Saudi foreign ambassador.
Yeah, true story. So, Terry, with the judge ruling that this can now proceed, what does the discovery process at this point in time open up as far as new avenues to potentially get your hands or get your attorneys get their hands on evidence that thus far they haven't been able to?
Right. So, we're going to continue pressuring the FBI to cooperate. This is a new administration, and this FBI can help us because it was misconduct done on all these previous FBI agencies. So they can review the misconduct of the past agencies, and then they can come on board and say, okay, we're going to do better and we're going to cooperate with you, because there really is no reason to withhold a lot of this information. But what happened, which is amazing, okay, because we weren't getting it from our own country. And you're correct in saying that our attorneys went over to England and asked them if they kept copies of everything that was withheld in this Bayumi file. But maybe I'm ahead of myself. Should we go back and say how we actually learned about it? Because that's pretty astounding the way it was being handled.
Yeah. So, I mean, this first segment is an overview, but by all means, go ahead and share that information now.
Okay, so when it became apparent that there was a lot of evidence on Bayumi, and the way that happened was the Operation Encore was a joint task force of different agencies in New York, including the San Diego. So you've got FBI, you've got New York detectives, you've got all these different agencies, working on Operation Encore. And one day, one of the agents gets a phone call, and it's somebody in a warehouse, and he says, there's a lot of boxes here with the name Al Bayumi on it. Isn't that somebody you're investigating for 9/11? And he said, yes. He said, absolutely. He said, send it to me. So he did, and when he received it on his end, he took it to his superior and put it on her desk and said, we need to analyze this. It was all in Arabic. And she took it and said, no, we don't. So it got buried a second time. And we can get into all of that, you're right, when we get into this a little bit more. But as far as compelling the FBI to do more, we've probably exhausted everything that we're going to do in the courts, because at some point the judge said we have to move on, right? You can go back and you can keep compelling them and you can keep, hammering them over the head, but we have to move on. And so luckily we were able to get all of this incredible evidence, which we'll get into, but none of it came from the FBI. And they had it in their possession 10 days after 9/11. They buried it all.
Which is just, on the one hand, it's mind blowing. On the other hand, it's kind of like, well, no surprise, really. Khalid, so Omar Al Bayumi and Fahid, I'm not going to be able to hit his name quite right, Al Thumer, they're both alive. They're both living in Saudi Arabia right now. Neither one's ever faced an American court. Do we stand any chance of getting them extradited here? And if we do, what's accountability look like for these guys, knowing their level of involvement in facilitating the attacks, Khalid?
Well, on one point of view, there's no way the Saudis are ever going to let them be extradited back into the U.S. because they carry all the evidence that the Saudi government was involved, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was involved in the 9/11 attacks. So there's no way Saudi Arabia is going to let them out of the country. Secondly, why they have not seen any prosecution? Because they were actually operating as agents of the government for Saudi Arabia. So I'm sure they're living very high lives, plenty of money, plenty of privilege, so that they don't have to worry about anything ever happening to them or their families, because what they did has been covered up by every US government. The Saudis have spent billions of dollars making sure that their story isn't uncovered. And we talked about this last night. I mean, Kash Patel on Glenn Beck's program said the first thing he was going to do when he came into office, when the Trump administration came into office, was that he was going to declassify the 9 pages of the 9/11 Commission report that flat out blames Saudi Arabia. We're a year into the new administration and those pages are still classified. And the reason for that is because you're protecting an ally that spends billions of dollars to fund your defense industry, to buy government bonds, to invest in real estate. And you're more interested in the money that's coming in than the people that died. And that is so scary from the point of view of a human being, that you're not protecting the people that the worst terrorist attack on in the history of the United States was ever carried out on, and you have no interest in actually pursuing it to the point of justice.
Yeah, it's again, it's mind numbing. It's not mind numbing. So Terry, before we wrap up the first segment here, what do you reckon the most damning piece of evidence is that the FBI has that your attorneys were able to secure from the MPS? And, what does it prove as far as the Saudi government's direct involvement?
Okay, so the FBI finally did conclude that Omar al-Bayoumi was a Saudi spy working for the Saudi government. He's on their payroll, and that they uncovered a U.S. Capitol casing video, and I would say the plane trajectory drawings. If I remember correctly, sitting in the courtroom, that's what tied the kingdom to the attacks, because it was through the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, MOIA, in the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C., that they were running this anti-American pro-jihadist program, and al-Bayoumi was reporting to someone in MOIA. So that kind of evidence is what ties it without any doubt, and I'm sure that's what the judge, relied on heavily. There's the welcome video, there's other things, there's phone records, there's a lot of things there. But in a court of law, we had to show the connection, and it's been shown 100%.
Yeah. So before we go to segment number 2 for the audience, quick audience poll. If you are not surprised at the FBI stonewalling Terry and the other 9/11 families, put a 1 in the live chat. I'm just curious to see how black-pilled our audience is on this particular topic. So let's move into segment number 2, which is the Saudi funding and logistics network inside America. The Saudi kingdom, as Terry mentioned, ran its Ministry of Islamic Affairs as an active anti-American operation out of its Washington, D.C. embassy, placing Saudi government employees with fabricated credentials inside American mosques and consulates, who then built the support network the hijackers depended on for everything: housing, banking, transportation, English translation, flight school contacts, and direct financial transfers. Because Midar and Hazmi arrived in California speaking no English, with no knowledge of American systems, and would not have survived for 2 weeks without the pre-positioned infrastructure. Saudi intelligence operative Omar al-Bayoumi did not accidentally befriend the first 2 hijackers. He was dispatched 18 months in advance to Southern California as part of that support network, received them on a work assignment, signed their apartment lease in San Diego, transferred nearly $10,000 into their bank accounts, bought them a car, set up their driver's license, and introduced them to a 29-person network at a filmed welcome party that the FBI received, sat on, and never gave to the 9/11 Commission. Above al-Bayoumi in the chain of command sat Saudi diplomat Fahad al-Thumairi, tied to the Saudi Ministry of Islamic Affairs, and above him the chain runs to the Saudi embassy in Washington. Phone records from the weeks before the hijackers' arrival show coordinated calls between Bayoumi, Thumairi, whoa, that one's a tongue twister for me. The Islamic Affairs Director at the Saudi Embassy, and Anwar al-Awlaki, who later became a senior al-Qaeda leader before being killed in a CIA drone strike in 2011. So first question for you, Terry. The Saudi Ministry of Islamic Affairs, they're running this network of operatives that they've got fabricated credentials inside of American mosques, which is tracking very, very closely to Khalid's intel right now, which is just mind-numbing. How extensive was that network beyond Southern California, and what did it provide to the hijackers in the other cities, not just Southern California?
Well, that's something we're still trying to figure out because of the very narrow jurisdictional discovery that we had. We could only look at this Southern California cell.
Okay.
But when you follow the path of Sudari and Sudan, they came into the United States, I believe, a week after the embassy bombings in Africa, and they were sent here as part of the advance team to start up the next attack that they were planning, Al-Qaeda, and that was going to be in the United States. So again, that's a lot of what the FBI has been withholding, their travel records and all of that. They moved from California to the East Coast driving, and they went to different cities along the way, Sudan and Sudari. When the investigators and the lawyers all figured out what was in this trove of evidence, and then you follow Midar and Hazmi's travel from California to the East Coast, and every city that they stopped in along the way is exactly where Sudan and Sudari had gone before them. So they were the advance team, always in front of them, always making the arrangements in the next city that they were going to be spending a little bit of time in. I don't know if they were getting more training there, if they were getting more details there, but they moved from the West Coast to the East Coast, and there was an advance team that was ahead of them, setting everything up for them. So we know that there's a lot more, but we have not had the discovery on that yet, because of the way that we're in this appeals system right now, and there's a stay on the case, and we can't go and put out more subpoenas. But we're going to get all of that. We're going to get it all.
Fair enough. I mean, Khalid lives his stuff 24/7, 365. So Khalid, can you expand or give us some insight or speculate on how big that network was then versus how big it is now? Because you've spoke at length of what we're currently facing. And here's like a big question on that, Khalid. Are these mosques that are currently functioning in this manner, are they funded by Saudi Arabia as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
The short answer is yeah. I said this the other night that most people don't realize the double game that Saudi Arabia is playing with the entire world. They like to show off the fact that they are very hostile to terrorism, hostile to Muslim Brotherhood. They banned the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, the Muslim Brotherhood is not even allowed to operate, but that doesn't mean that they're not funding the Muslim Brotherhood. During the initial years of Al-Qaeda was getting funding directly from the House of Saud. And the House of Saud, for people who don't know, is the royal family of Saudi Arabia. Are the mosques being funded by the Saudis? Hell yes, they are. There's no way that kind of money can be flown. It can be pushed into these places and build these huge structures and support organizations without that the kind of money that Saudi Arabia can provide. The interesting part when you look at this is that Saudi Arabia has always worked their terrorism point of view, or should I say their asymmetric warfare point of view, as being a part of the Saudi intelligence agency. So what you have is Saudi intelligence running ground, running cover, running all kinds of support, putting the people in place they want in place, giving them fake diplomatic identities, so that if anyone asks questions, well, look, I'm part of the Saudi embassy. You can't question me. You can't harass me. You can't arrest me. The worst thing you can do is throw me out of the country, call me persona non grata, and throw me out of the country. But there's 5 more people behind them doing the exact same thing. And unlike any other country in the world, when you talk about espionage and counterintelligence, every country has spies. We all know that. But the Saudis have used their spies to do very despicable things. Look at what happened to Jamal Khashoggi in the Turkish embassy. And you cut the guy up, flew him out of the country, and no one in Turkey was able to file a case against him because Saudi Arabia said, no, you cannot prosecute us for this because it happened on our soil inside of our embassy. So what does Saudi Arabia do when they're having these meetings with all of these operatives? They call them to the embassy. So the US law is not able to reach them. They are on Saudi soil. They are talking to Saudi government. They are part of the Saudi infrastructure. So the U.S. law can't touch them because they're protected assets.
Yeah, so what you're touching on there in Latin, in legal terms, is called sedis, and it means where we sit. I've encountered that in some lawsuits. The only reason I know that. Did you have something you wanted to add, Terry?
Yes, the kingdom only knows three ways of doing business. They bribe you, they threaten you, or in Jamal Khashoggi's case, they kill you. All of this money that they've poured in, all of these defense contracts, yes, that proves another thing is that they need us more than we need them because they need our weaponry. But even the money they've poured into our universities, it's all to have a hold on you, right? Because once they've given you millions or billions of dollars and you're not going to speak out against them publicly, you're going to actually defend them. And that's what they've been doing since 9/11 in trying to change their image and in trying to convince the American people. But we know better. We just do because of 9/11. They're not to be trusted until Mohammed bin Salman agrees to sit down and let's get it all out in the open and talk about it, because I agree 100% that we know that the mosques have been funded by the kingdom. It was the King Fahad Mosque out in California, named after the king, where Al Thumari was working. I mean,
Yep.
it's where they hide, and it's where they plan and plot, and it's where they also brainwash, young people, and all of that is part of what needs to be exposed. So it can, that when I say better policies moving forward, that we can do a better job in this country. But that's all going to come, hopefully, as an end result of the lawsuit.
Would it surprise you to learn that if a mosque and officials of that mosque preach violence against Americans or violence in America, and somebody pays a tithe or somebody donates money towards them, that, and this has gone to the Supreme Court, by the way, that we can denaturalize or take away their green card or take away their visa and deport them for that as material aid? I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. We have levers that we can pull, but we just don't have anybody who's got the wherewithal to do it in a position of power. It's brutal.
Right, because after they bribe you, they threaten you. So there's been times when I've been in Washington, D.C., trying to get something accomplished for the lawsuit, and I get pulled aside and said, hey, they made this threat, hey, they made that threat. The embassy, they've been in our offices, they don't call them threats, they just say, they've made their case. And that's what they do. They go in and they make threats about not cooperating. One time I was told, they're blocking the missiles that are coming into Israel, and they're going to stop doing that if you keep moving, if you keep asking for what you're asking for. And that really irritates me because it's all BS. They threatened economic warfare against us for JASTA. I mean, they threatened to pull out billions of dollars out of our economy. And then they also threatened to stop cooperating with the intelligence on ISIS. So I think if you really ever wanted to know where all of this began and what happened, is if we all could know what happened on the Truman balcony when Bandar sat down and was smoking a cigar with President Bush 4 days after 9/11, because that's where it all began. That's where the deals were being made. We messed up. It was 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian. Osama bin Laden is a Saudi national. They probably knew we were going to be on to Omar al-Bayoumi and Thumari and figure a lot of this out. So immediately, I think they started to say, we will work with you now on intelligence. So it's crazy because that was the first thing I was told when I went to DC years ago, is they're partners with us in counterterrorism. Really? They're partners with us? Well, you know, that is still not an excuse, even if they were our partners, for what happened on 9/11. It's very, very frustrating to walk the halls of Washington, D.C. and run in and talk to people that think it's perfectly okay to not hold them accountable for the murder of 3,000 Americans because they're our buddies now. It's really awful.
Yeah, it is. Khalid, let's just kind of go down a rabbit hole quickly here. There's been quite a bit said. I haven't seen any concrete proof, so chatter, let's call it, that the Saudis have basically said to us, Americans, that if we allow them to be exposed for what they did in 9/11 and other things, then they'll drop a dime on us for all of the stuff that we've done around the world that they're aware of. I have no doubt that's the case, but maybe, pick that up and run with it for a minute, Khalid, as far as the leverage that they have against us.
That's absolutely true. I'm actually privy to that conversation. The Saudis told the Americans that if you let this prosecution of Saudi Arabia go forward, we will put out all of the evidence that we have of the U.S.'s involvement around the world in different regime change operations, military campaigns where international laws were violated. Saudi Arabia has also put a second threat forward that if the prosecution goes forward, we'll pull all of our investments out of the United States, which means
yes, that's what I just said, and that never came true. The government needs to understand the kingdom needs us more than we need them. All of their threats are empty threats. They're not going to do what they say they're going to do because our military base on their land is protecting them. We hold all the cards, and that's all it takes is an administration that has a backbone, that understands this and can bring them to the table. Well, we don't want them to bring them to the table, but just help convince the kingdom that this isn't going to fare well for them in the long run, because the government can't stop the lawsuit, and they're not going to stop the courts from ruling in our favor with the evidence that we have and that we are amassing against the kingdom. And hopefully the American people will start to be outraged and want it bad enough. But the kingdom makes a lot of empty threats. They need our weaponry, and they need us there to protect them, because if we weren't there on their peninsula, Iran would owe them in a heartbeat. So we are their protection.
Gone as well. Terry, sorry to interrupt, but the monarchy would be gone as well, because all of the Saudi wealth is in the control of the family. The people get nothing, and they're being duped into believing that we get so much because the regime. But it's that same mentality that the hollow threats are the thing that all of these monarchies in the Middle East, and all of them are involved, Chris. It's not just the Saudis. All of the monarchies are involved at a certain level in terrorism around the world, whether they are funding the terror groups, whether they're providing cover for the terror groups, whether they're providing passports, human resources. They're all involved, and nobody wants to throw the book at these countries, because it's easier to handle a monarchy than it is to handle a democracy in a country where you have no control. And that's basically where the U.S. rolls back to, that if Saudi Arabia were to turn into a democracy, well, geez, every democratic country in the Middle East is out of our control. The people are radicalized. They're against the U.S. We don't want another enemy in the Middle East. That's not a justification for allowing them to blackmail you when over 3,000 lives were taken because of your own intelligence services.
So, Khalid, or Terry, you can jump in as well. So let's just say we get down the road, discovery, we get into the trial, and let's call it the tactics that the Saudi Arabians have been using, all the stuff that both of you have described, the mosques, invading educational institutions, so on and so forth, gets exposed to the normies, for lack of a better term. Does that help us at all, Khalid, as far as future terrorist attacks on us are concerned?
I don't think so, because the problem with the normies is that they see what happens in a news cycle and they forget about it. There's no sustained campaign to the American people to explain to them who the real enemies of the US are and how they're using US law, US universities, and US think tanks to subvert the US objectives. Look at what happened with Qatar. I mean, everyone knows that Qatar is funding the Muslim Brotherhood. They are funding universities. The whole Palestinian protest issue that happened in the US last year was all funded by Qatar. But who's talking about it? I mean, Pam Bondi was a lobbyist for Qatar. Susie Wiles was a lobbyist for Qatar. Kash Patel took money from Qatar to advise them, yet they're still part of the administration. The outrage stops as soon as the media stops covering it. There is no sustained campaign to keep that in front of the American people, that look what they did to us, look what they're doing to us, look what they're doing to us, so that the outrage in the American people starts to climb.
Yeah, so Terry, I'm not an attorney. I just play one on my podcast. Curious what your attorneys have said as far as the money trail. So you got this money trail from the Saudis to the Saudi embassy through Bayoumi to the hijackers. There's a chain of custody there. But what happens when it gets to court if somebody says, well, yeah, I got the money, but it was my choice what to do with it? What is there other pieces of evidence that need to be assembled with that to prove that
Yes.
that direction being given?
Well, yes, but what you're missing is where did the money come from, right? So they say, right, we received money out in California and it came through through Prince Bandar's wife's bank account, and she was supplying money to the handlers of the hijackers. And she says, oh, I was just helping out some Saudis. So that's one piece of where some of the money came from. But where it came from, as long as it was coming from somebody out of Moya, the Ministry of Islamic Affairs in the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C., that is an arm of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's government. So there's the chain. It is the government that was supplying money to the hijackers. It's not hard to prove. When somebody says, so the kingdom did want to hide behind, I think it's called, I can't think of the name of it right now, but they did want to say, we're entitled to give money to Al Qaeda if we want. We're entitled to use them for protection if that's what we're using them for, or look the other way when they do something to somebody we don't like. Like, who are you to tell us what we can and can't do in our country? We're not. We're telling you what you can and can't do in our country. Once you've given that money and it ends up in the hijackers' training to murder Americans, and they carry out, and Al Qaeda carries it out, and you were the ones that gave the money, not only to Al Qaeda, but you also supplied the money for the attacks and the logistical support for the attacks. That's why we enacted JASTA. We absolutely can hold you accountable in a U.S. court, because Congress wanted the American people to have that power. They wanted fulsome liability. They wanted it to go beyond what a country may or may not do diplomatically with a country that just murdered Americans on American soil. But they wanted the victims' family members to be able, and the survivors, the injured survivors, to be able to use the civil justice system and slap them with a big lawsuit and bring the evidence into a courtroom and hold them accountable. If you deny that, then you are denying American victims of terrorism, the people that were harmed by it, from being allowed to present your evidence in a courtroom. That was the purpose of JASTA. Everything was being dismissed on sovereign immunity. We said, no, the case should be heard on the merits. And that is what the judge has agreed on. So this case is moving forward, and the evidence is going to keep coming in. And the ties to the kingdom are there. They're indisputable at this point. It's just, how far are they going to go before they call uncle and they don't want us to keep exposing, this layer and that layer, because we have this much and it's this big.
Yeah. So, by the way, thank you. Don't bug me. Appreciate your tip. Do either one of you want to take a swing at this before I ask my next question? Why did they do this? What was their motive? Do you want to take a swing at that, Terry?
Sure. So if you're asking me, why did the kingdom do it? Al Qaeda, let's get it straight. Al Qaeda attacked us. They brutally attacked us on 9/11. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, through their Wahhabi sector, it's the House of Saud, it's the House of Wahhabi. They are the extremists, and they were the ones made a deal with the Saudis. You give us all the money for us to go do what we want to do, and we will ensure that you stay in power in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So the House of Saud gives the House of Wahhabi all the money they need. They were the ones out there building these mosques at a rapacious rate all around the world and filling them with extremists. But this is still an arm of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's government. And the United States was not immune to that. So like the King Fahd Mosque out in California and many other mosques, they were putting their clerks in there, and their imams in there that had extremist views that agreed with what Al-Qaeda's goals were. And they ended up helping them. They ended up being the facilitators, being the conduits for the money to go through. So it's always been that Al-Qaeda brutally attacked us, but the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia aided and abetted the attacks, and they certainly financed Al-Qaeda leading up to the attacks. And because of that, we can hold them accountable in a U.S. court.
Has it been officially confirmed that Bayoumi was like an intel agent?
Yes.
It
Yes.
has. Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. We didn't know that for years. And then in one of the reports that came out, it's like, oh, you know, he is a spy. You have recognized him as that. And, you know, he was here in the United States on a student visa. He never attended classes. He had a job at a Saudi aviation company that he never went to work at. And when the first arriving hijackers came into the United States, his salary tripled. And then, yes, he was known to be a Saudi asset, a Saudi spy. You know, some used to say, oh, he was just here kind of keeping an eye on the Saudis, you know, who was doing what. Yes, and then he was doing more than that. But he's one of, you know, he's one of many. He's not the only one that was involved. He's just the one that happened to have amassed all of this evidence through his videos and everything. He kept everything. So, you know, I know we're going to get into that part of it, but it's just amazing.
Yeah, I'm going to play some of the video here very shortly. Khalid and Terry, by all means, take a swing at this as well. Just because I've been involved in numerous lawsuits. How do you think a judge would react? This judge, is it Dennis? Is that his name? Judge Daniels, pardon me. Sorry. I'll just have to think of Jack Daniels, Judge Daniels, JD. Anyway, and I'm not a drinker, by the way. Just make it easy to remember. What happens if he's being examined by the Saudi attorneys? And the Saudi attorneys, even at, let's say he doesn't even show up, doesn't have to be, but the Saudi attorneys make an argument that say, yeah, well, he's been an employee of our government for, you know, whatever many years. And of course we give him money, but his involvement in the 9/11 stuff was unsanctioned activities. Does the JASTA Act or anything else basically allow the judge to say, yeah, we're not going to buy that. We're going to go ahead and proceed because he took the money?
Yes, because of Moya, because everything is coming out of the Ministry of Islamic Affairs is Moya. The government agency of the kingdom was the one orchestrating all of this.
Yeah, I've just seen lots of stuff that's airtight get in front of a judge and get blown up by a, you know, a very skilled attorney. So call it 50 times bitten, one shy.
But we're going to trial. I don't know what will happen, you know, once we get to trial. But before we can go to trial, they've appealed the decision that we're going to trial. That's all going on right now in the courts. So I think they filed their appeal. We answered it. They have an opportunity now to respond to our response. And then there's one more time that our attorneys respond to what they said, and that'll be a very narrow argument. Then the appellate court will call for oral arguments, and that will happen 3 to 6 months maybe after all of this other stuff ends. And it's every brief that is told to be handed in. It's roughly 3 months. They're given, you know, each side is given 3 months, you're 3 months, 3 months. So, you know, it's a year before you even get to the point where the judge can, or this new court, the appellate court, will call for the oral arguments. But, you know, the hope is that the appellate court's going to hold up the original judge's ruling and say that you're going to trial. And, you know, who knows what the kingdom will try to pull next. But at some point, if going to trial is the final answer, then full discovery happens. And that's when you can examine every cell, every person outside of just Thumari and Al-Bayoumi. And that's when everything will expand like this. You know, I can't even show you in the picture how big it'll be.
Yeah. Khalid, I know you wanted to add something there. Go ahead, and then I've got a question for you after you expand on that.
Well, there's a couple of things you need to understand about how the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia operates inside the United States. Every Saudi student that is studying in a university in the United States is being paid a salary by the Saudi government to be there. Their housing is paid for. They are given a monthly salary. They are there as long as Saudi Arabia wants them there. Once the deal they make, and I'm putting the deal in air quotes, the deal they make with the government is that I will go and study in America. I will get my bachelor's degree. I will get my master's degree. I will get my PhD. I will be of service to the Saudi government in any way the Saudi government needs me. I will be paid for my services. And when Saudi Arabia wants to bring me back to Saudi Arabia to work for the kingdom, I will get on a plane and fly back. That means that every single Saudi student in the United States is a Saudi asset. That's something that people need to be really clear on. That every single Saudi in the United States right now in a university, whether it be a small community college or a major university, is a Saudi asset. They are tied to the kingdom's government. Second thing you need to keep in mind is Saudi Arabia uses a lot of intermediaries to fund their mosque. Now, one of the policies of the Saudi government is every single extremist Wahhabi preacher is automatically exported from Saudi Arabia so that there's no extremism in Saudi Arabia, but all of that is sent to foreign countries. And we've been one of the biggest victims in Pakistan. One of every single imam that we have in Pakistan that is radicalizing people has a connection to Saudi Arabia. They are regularly flown back. They are regularly given briefings and seminars in Saudi Arabia. They are regular guests of the Saudi embassies in whatever country they're in. They are funded heavily. There is no way to even ask where that funding is coming from. They have developed this policy of we can do what we want because we have so much money to spend on you that we can shut you up if we want to. And my biggest fear, looking at how the US government has operated in other cases like this, you can have that judge removed from the bench. You could have that judge moved to another case. You could have the State Department put in a diplomatic push saying, well, no, this is going to affect our foreign policy and we don't want this made public, and bring it under seal so nothing can be made public. There are so many tools that the US government can use to shut a judge up that my fear, and I've been following this entire story with Paul Sperry. Paul Sperry has been covering this from the very beginning. And my fear has always been that Saudi Arabia has so many dirty cards in their hands that they can make things happen with a bit of money here and there. If you take, for example, the Bushes are in bed with the Bin Laden family because they have contracts in Saudi Arabia with the Bin Laden family. Now, how can you be working with the Bin Laden family on a business level and be after Osama bin Laden, who's a member of the Bin Laden family? There are too many pieces, there are too many things that have to be investigated from a very honest point of view to understand who is working against the United States and how they're doing it. Because it's not just the Muslim countries that are doing it. You've got China doing it. You've got Russia doing it. You have a lot of countries that are working against the objectives of the United States and doing it under the cover of, well, we have the ability to blackmail your government.
Yeah, well,
So
go
I
ahead.
think, well, I think if they were going to try to remove the judge, they would have done it by now. But in JASTA, there's a provision, and it's the stay provision. So the government cannot do some of those things that you just said. It's in the law that this entire case is being followed under. They cannot come in and stop the case, do any of these nefarious things. If they want to stay the case, then they have to operate in good faith, and that means bring us in and start talking to us. I mean, we tried to do everything we could to protect ourselves or protect this lawsuit from things like that. When JAS is only 4 pages, by the way. This is not an overly complicated bill. It protected the military families, which is the threat that they use constantly, that they were going to be at risk for being sued for their service to this country or service overseas, and all of that was a lie. They've done a lot of underhanded things, the kingdom, and they haven't gotten away with any of them yet. And I'm going to continue to believe that this evidence is going to speak volumes, and that they're not going to, they're certainly not going to be dismissed. And I don't see this judge disappearing from the case like that. I think if anything like that was going to happen, it would have already.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. I mean, we're just used to a lot of bad news in our field.
Well, we get it all the time, but the evidence is incredibly strong. So,
and I mean, obviously, we want things to work out as best as possible for our fellow Americans. Let's go into segment number 3, 25 years of political cover, both parties, every administration. Every administration from Bush through Biden chose strategic and economic relationships with the Saudi kingdom over the demands of the 9/11 families, invoking state secrets, slow-walking Biden's own 2021 executive order to declassify records with zero actual agency cooperation, and allowing the FBI to maintain its posture of institutional protection while Operation Encore's findings were kept buried. When Terry finally met face-to-face with then FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino at the 9/11 memorial ceremony on September 11, 2025, there was what looked like initial movement. Then the cooperation was cut off and Terry was ghosted with somebody inside the bureau shutting it down. Saudi Arabia deployed more than 20,000 street lobbying, no, more than 20, pardon me, K Street, I'm used to K being 1,000, 20 K Street lobbying firms simultaneously, spent $9.4 million in a single year on U.S. advocacy, and funneled over $1.5 million through its registered foreign agents directly into congressional campaign accounts. Terry said they were spending $1.3 million a month at the peak, a textbook operation to purchase permanent immunity inside the American political system, while categories of evidence the family subpoenaed remain unproduced to this day. What makes this moment different is that a federal judge took 13 months to review the full evidentiary record, not the government's curated version of it, not the 9/11 Commission's incomplete picture, but the complete MPS production and everything the families assembled over 25 years. And on August 28, 2025, ruled it sufficient for trial. A ruling, as Terry mentioned, Saudi Arabia is now appealing to the Second Circuit while writing their rebuttal. So, Terry, maybe share your experience September 11th last year with Dan Bongino.
Right. So I was at the memorial, and he wasn't scheduled to be there. So I was not thinking I was going to have any opportunity to meet him or Kash Patel. It was actually supposed to be Vice President Vance, but Charlie Kirk had been murdered the day before, and the vice president had flown out to his family since they were personal friends. And so I was just walking by the VIP tent, and I saw Bongino in there, and I saw Kash Patel in there, and I found a way to get invited in. And I also saw Secretary Lutnick was in there, who I've known over the years. I had a moment first to speak with Kash Patel because I had written a letter to the FBI the month before, and 17 pages, and 11 of it is explaining all of the misconduct from the past FBIs that we dealt with. And then it goes into the category of evidence that's still missing. So I was already alerting this new FBI agency under Kash Patel that the 9/11 families still needed evidence and wanted him to look at the misconduct that has happened to us. So I have a very, very short minute with Kash Patel asking him if he received the letter, and he was shaking his head yes. He was on the other side of a rope, so I didn't have the intimacy that I ended up having with Dan Bongino. I then asked the secretary, I said, can you introduce me to Dan Bongino? And he said, sure. He walked me over, and he did. And I'm sure that Deputy Director Bongino thought, you know, as a 9/11 widow, that's how Howard introduced me. My husband was Cantor Fitzgerald. He was the CEO. Plus, we went to the same schools and all that. Anyway, I wanted to have a minute with Bongino about what we needed. And, you know, at first he was a little bit annoyed, and understandably so. This is a memorial. I don't want to have this conversation with him either. And that's what I told him. I said, I don't want to be doing this right now either, but I don't have any other way to reach you. So he asked me if I had a business card. I didn't. I got a piece of paper and I wrote down all of my information, and I told him that and what we needed. And he looked at me in the eye and he said, I want to help you. Thank you very much. I didn't want to bother him anymore. I left the tent. About 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from somebody up in the FBI, very high up in the FBI. And they said, I'm holding this note from Bongino that you gave to him, Deputy Director Bongino, on the 11th. And I said, oh, my handwritten note. And he said, yes. And I said, he goes, you want documents? And I said, there's more to it than that. I said, but that's a start. I said, we need a meeting. And he said, okay. He said, that's not easy. And I said, that's okay. I live in Florida. I can go to Mar-a-Lago. I can get myself to DC, New York, wherever the meeting's going to happen, I can do it. Then he gave me his phone number. He gave me his email. And he said, give me about 3 weeks and I will let you know what I know. I said, thank you very much. 3 weeks to the day, I emailed him. Didn't write back. Started calling. Didn't take my calls. And that's what happened. I was, like you said, ghosted. Somebody shut it down. I don't know where. I don't know if it came from the FBI. I don't know if it came from the administration. I'm still hopeful that a meeting will happen. I'm still hopeful that they understand the importance of it. And so I'm not here saying I was told you can't have a meeting. I'm just here saying they haven't responded yet to my request for a meeting.
And fair enough. Khalid, Biden signed an executive order in 2021 to declassify the records related to Saudi involvement. Not a single agency cooperated. How does?
Excuse me. I'm sorry, but that's not accurate.
No,
no, because the FBI has cooperated. They haven't fully cooperated. They
cooperated. Fair enough.
Right. And I don't think we've gotten anything from the CIA, but I don't really follow that one too much. So it's not fair to say that they've never cooperated. That we wouldn't have a lot of what we have. It's just that they don't fully cooperate, and there's a lot of evidence still that we need from them.
So when they gave evidence, was that a result of the executive order or
both? The subpoena?
Yeah.
They didn't fully comply with the subpoena. That's when we said, okay, let's get Congress to do a Transparency Act. And they agreed. And then the Biden administration picked that up as an EO. And when the EO went out, within a very short amount of time, we got a lot of things, but they're very, conniving, right? They'll just send you a lot of things you've already have, or they'll send you a lot of things that really aren't related to what you were asking for. But then some things you get, a lot of it's heavily redacted, but the attorneys, there's a key to it, because this is all public documents now, public domain. And there's a key, and you'll see that if it's a certain, shading of black, maybe, that the attorneys can actually see that, but you can't as a person in the public. So it's not fair to say nothing and that they have not, but it's very fair to say that they haven't fully cooperated and that they've withheld quite a bit, and that they've played a lot of games in overclassifying. Like I said, they scrapped back and took things that were out in the open and classified those. They refused to do simple searches. Like, okay, we're going to request these documents to be declassified. Can you search for the name Bayumi? No, we can't do that. Well, that's what they do. There is an entire branch in the FBI, and their job is to declassify to the greatest extent possible evidence that's going to be used in a courtroom, not just our lawsuit, for every lawsuit that the FBI might have documents for. They have an entire section that handles that. What they did with our evidence is they took it all out of them, and they put a few people in charge that we are very, very strongly suspicious were the ones that buried all of the Bayumi evidence in the first place. So they gave it to people that were very sympathetic to the Saudis and not sympathetic to us. And that's a problem. So there's a lot of things that Director Patel, since Bongino isn't there any longer, could help us with if he chose to have a conversation, look at this letter, look at the body of evidence, look at the complaint, look at the misconduct. The same people that were hurting us are the same people that, went after President Trump, because it was Director Mueller. He was there in the beginning. I mean, I don't think we've ever really said exactly what happened 10 days after 9/11. Can I say that for a minute real quick?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So on September 11th, Midar and Hazmi, the two first arriving hijackers, they left their car parked in the parking lot of the airport. Within that first hour, they knew every hijacker's name because they were on the manifest, because they used their real names. They didn't even use aliases to buy their plane tickets and do any of this. So they find their car in the parking lot, they raid it, they get their address where they lived out in California, and immediately, who's on the lease? It's this person's name, Al-Bayoumi. He became a person of interest within hours of 9/11. He was living in Birmingham, England at the time. So I think that they probably used a few days to figure out some more things about Al-Bayoumi, and they did. They found out a lot, and they called up the MPS, the Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, and they said, raid his apartment, take everything that's there, and bring him in for questioning. They took him in for questioning, and then all of this evidence that was collected, they didn't even share it with their counterterrorism expert that was questioning Al-Bayoumi. He was there for 10 days. That was the length of time that they could keep him. At the end of his being questioned, the counterintelligence officer in London told the FBI, we think he's very, very involved. We want to extradite him to the United States so you can talk to him. You can have him on your land. And the FBI said, no, let him go. They never shared that evidence with them. They brought all the evidence to the United States. They did not give it to the field office in San Diego that was conducting the investigation into Al-Bayoumi. They never gave it in its entirety to the 9/11 Commission. They actually manipulated parts of the welcome video to tell a different story than what actually happened. They never gave the U.S. casing video of the U.S. Capitol. To this day, they've never given that. And the plane trajectory drawing, they didn't have properly analyzed. So, like we said, they don't share it with anyone. And fast forward into when Operation Encore was going on, and that investigator got the phone call, and he said, it's basically in a burn bag. It's basically ready to be destroyed. And he said, send it to me. His superior, I don't know that his superior was FBI, because this was the Joint Terrorist Task Force. I don't know what agency that exactly was that said, we're not analyzing this. And it got put aside again. And it wasn't until our attorneys learned that there was so much more there, but didn't know what it was, and went over to London and said, can we have it? And that took about a year to unwind. And then another year, once you get it, of analyzing it. So it's been analyzed by experts. And I know you've seen the U.S. Capitol casing video, how bone chilling it is. And then the welcome video, what was so important about that was, Al-Bayoumi's saying he just helped these guys out a little bit. But he didn't. He actually was kind of one of the conduits to set up the support network. And because he had all of these connections out in California, they said he was like a regular Joe. He knew everybody in the consulate and in the mosques and all of that. So he gathered all of these people for a welcome party. That's what we call it. And he had the two hijackers there to introduce them to everybody that was going to help them. There were 29 people in this meeting, and there's a video of it. It was a couple of different videos had to be put together to have it properly analyzed, but in its entirety, what it shows is the videographer, he spans the room, they're all sitting on the floor, their legs crossed, and Bayoumi's directing the videographer over his shoulder. He goes, film here, film there. He says, do not film that side of the room. And for whatever reason, thank God, the videographer pans the entire room. And it was really on that side that you saw, and I can't tell you exactly who today, because I only saw it briefly in the courtroom. I've never been able to see this video again, but that's where, Saudi nationals and some probably were the ones that were connected to Moya. The next thing that you see out of the welcome video in the courtroom is a key comes up, and there's different colors telling you what role that they played in the support network, banking, housing, flight lessons, English lessons, even like their gym memberships, car rentals. There's just all these keys and all these different colors. And they take a picture of that room in its entirety with all 29, Arabic men sitting, and they all go black like a silhouette. They're all black now. And slowly, like that one light up in pink. And then that pink key becomes more prominent. And they go, he helped him with banking. He helped him with banking. Then the next key would come up as green, and maybe 3 other black silhouettes would now turn green. And you could see they were helping, with their flight lessons. So they showed in a courtroom, without a doubt, that was the support network. And then you bring in the airplane trajectory drawing of calculations of how to hit a target on the ground. And that was also found in Bayomi's apartment. Al-Bayoumi, he has been deposed. So we were able to ask him questions. And his answer to the plane trajectory was, it's just math. Maybe I remembered something in high school. I don't know. It's just math. That's how he answered that question. But when the airplane trajectory was analyzed by experts, then it did show calculations, of a descent to get in, that you would hit a target on the ground. The U.S. Capitol casing video, like I said, that's never been given to us by the FBI. They're still holding it to this day. I don't know if there's more on it. Nobody knows why they won't give it. But what we got from the NPS shows Al-Bayoumi with his video camera, and he's talking about the U.S. Capitol, but he's showing you their exits and their entrances, and he's showing you where the Capitol Police are stationed. And at one point, it looks like from far away, one of the Capitol Police might be looking over at him, and quickly he puts the camera down because the next thing you see is just dirt and flowers, and then he brings it back up again slowly, and he's talking about they're evil, and this is the U.S. Congress, and their day is over, my job is not. He talks about the plan. That's when people say, what plan was he referring to? But he also then pans on the monument. And the monument is a landmark that if you're flying into Washington, D.C., and you're going to try to hit the Capitol, then you need to know where the monument is, or the monument will help guide you to it. So the U.S. Capitol casing video, the plane drawings, the welcome video, but also phone book. His phone book was confiscated. And there's, I think, up to 150 entries. And I think there's even some code names. I don't remember them off the top of my head right now, but they're Al-Qaeda code names. So he has probably Al-Qaeda operatives at Moya. So many, phone numbers go back to the embassy in Washington, D.C. And he's also, a lot of his travel has been tracked to know when he was going in and out of places and who he was talking to. But that's what is so astonishing is that this was all collected 10 days after 9/11. The FBI chose to bury it then. They had another opportunity to have it analyzed 10 years later in Operation Encore. They said absolutely not. They had no intentions of us ever seeing it. On the U.S. Capitol casing video, there's 2 other men, Sudan and Sudari. They're there with him. And as I said earlier, though we're part of the advance team, they came to the United States 7 days after the U.S. embassies were bombed in Africa because Al-Qaeda was moving their operation to the United States.
Man, you covered a lot of ground there. I want to play the video of Al-Bayoumi, casing Washington, D.C. But before I do that, Khalid, give me your take on the Trump administration right now is trying to negotiate new defense pacts with the Saudis in light of all the stuff going on with the Iran conflict. But he's also trying to get them to enrich uranium for us. We go through 50 million pounds of uranium a year, enriched uranium here, and we produce 1 million pounds. The other 49 million pounds come from other countries. And he's allocated billions of dollars, to increase production on our side. But how does this, defense pact and enriched uranium angle potentially tie into the Fed's cooperation with the 9/11 families?
Well, the first thing you have to look at is anything you do with Saudi Arabia while this case is going on turns into something that can be used against you to stop that case from going forward. I'll give you a simple example. Donald Trump announced that Saudi Arabia wanted nuclear power plants in Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. said that we'll fund it, we'll build it, and we will put nuclear power plants on Saudi soil. You are putting nuclear power into a country that could explode in a matter of hours or days. Because if the people of Saudi Arabia were to turn against the regime couldn't survive. It could not survive because the people of Saudi Arabia would overthrow the country. That uranium, plutonium, whatever you're putting into that nuclear facility could easily be pulled out in little bits and handed over to Al-Qaeda so they could make a nuclear bomb. We know Al-Qaeda has engineers that can create a nuclear weapon. The only thing that and bin Laden has been famously quoted as saying this, that he brought a couple of physicists from Pakistan to discuss with them about creating a nuclear bomb. And the physicists explained to him how they would do it and how it would need to be done. They said, well, the only problem you have is you don't have any fissionable material. And bin Laden very quietly replied, how do you know I don't have any? And when you have that thing sitting in Saudi Arabia, you give them the opportunity to take terrorism to a very different level. I have always been against the belief that America needs Saudi Arabia, because Saudi is something that, if you actually understand how Saudi Arabia operates, they have been a bigger detriment to U.S. security than any other country in the world, because they're playing a very beautiful double game. And I'll even go to this point. The Trump administration that's in power right now, who was it that orchestrated the meeting between Giuliani and Donald Trump? The Saudis.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
you have a sitting Al-Qaeda commander who met Donald Trump in Saudi Arabia, was invited to the United Nations, and was invited to the White House. This is a current Al-Qaeda commander that has been facilitated like this because of the Saudis. And you have to start wondering, wait a minute, who's pulling whose strings? Because, I mean, we said this when Giuliani came to the U.S., we all screamed about this and said, how is it that an Al-Qaeda commander who is a sworn, affirmed Al-Qaeda commander is sitting at the White House with the president of the United States? And back in Al-Qaeda circles, all of their encrypted channels were going crazy, going, look, our commander is with the president. Our commander is with the president. Who orchestrated that? The Saudis.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling when you think about it. Let me bring up the video of him, al-Bayoumi, casing essentially targets in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to let the first 2 minutes of this play. It's a 13-minute video, but it's the first 2 minutes that's really relevant. But there, and I'm going to prime our audience with some information on segment 4, and then I'll come to you first, Terry. So what a trial means, discovery, terror cells, and the full network map is the title for segment 4. So on July 31st, 2024, the Capitol casing video, which we just watched, was read into the federal record at oral arguments. The same video the British MPS seized from Bayoumi's Birmingham apartment 10 days after 9/11, turned over to the FBI, in which the Bureau then sat on for over 20 years without sharing it with the 9/11 Commission, the CIA, or its own field agents. It was the MPS, not the FBI, that ultimately produced that video and the rest of the trove, including the Al-Qaeda handbook, to the families through direct discovery. Judge Daniel's ruling does not just allow one lawsuit to proceed. It opens full legal discovery into Al-Qaeda support cells the FBI documented in Boston, New Jersey, Florida, Virginia, and Phoenix, meaning the full scope of the Saudi-directed network inside America is about to enter the federal record for the first time. And a petition drive launched by 9/11 Families United is asking the public to sign and pressure the FBI to finally cooperate fully with the court. For prepared Americans watching the threat environment in 2026, that network map matters right now because the infrastructure that supported 19 hijackers in 2001 did not simply disappear, and the institutional failures that allowed it to operate undetected for years are the same failures that left American cities exposed to the coordinated attack environment we're watching unfold today. So, Terry, coming to you with the first question. The Capitol casing video was read into the federal record July 31st, 2024. The MPS produced it to the families directly because the FBI never would. Walk us through exactly what that video means to your case.
The Capitol?
Yeah,
like
the
you said
Capitol.
earlier, right. So it shows a direct tie that al-Bayoumi was preparing for the September 11th attacks. The date, the time of that video falls into the time frame that Al-Qaeda was picking its targets for the 9/11 attack. So that came out in a different report. So that's the importance of it, that he was directly involved in the planning of September 11th by helping pick out the target that the hijackers would eventually hit.
So let me tack this onto the question. So that trove of evidence from the MPS that included phone books full of Saudi government officials, Al-Qaeda contacts, videos, diagrams of planes hitting buildings. What else is in that, trove that hasn't been widely reported, but your legal team is trying to secure?
Well, the welcoming video has not been widely reported because people just don't take the time to explain what it was. What else is in that trove? There's 50 to 60 videos. So I don't know what else. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He had an incredible amount of documentation of his role in helping the hijackers plan and plot the attacks. And he kept everything. Notes. There's a lot of notes. There's a lot of letters. He wrote letters. I haven't seen those yet either. So not everything has been admitted into the courtroom yet. And I don't know how much they're going to use. There's a lot of evidence outside of this trove, but this was the damning evidence. This was what really tied it all in, who Bayoumi was and what he was doing.
Well, I didn't know about the 50 additional videos, so that's exactly the kind of answer I was looking for, just to paint
there's more.
That there's a lot there. Yeah, amazing. Khalid, so with this discovery now, basically, allows the investigation to reach out to Al-Qaeda cells, like investigate Al-Qaeda cells, turn over intelligence on Al-Qaeda cells in 5 American cities. What do you reckon, Khalid, that is going to come out of that? And I know it's not all speculation, maybe partially speculation, but share what you can as far as the information that's probably going to come out of that stuff, Khalid.
Well, it really depends on how actively the FBI investigates the different cells that were operating inside the United States. Right now, if the FBI were to become an actual investigative organization and figure out who was involved in these cells, how they were operating, where they are right now, you could literally take down Al-Qaeda in the US completely, comprehensively take them down. At the same time, you would be able to shut down a lot of the funding routes that are being used by Saudi Arabia and other countries to fund terrorism as well. Again, it comes back to that same statement of whether the FBI is willing to do it or not. Because when you start putting foreign policy and defense contractors against the safety of the American people, the government tends to lean a different way than what the American people would expect. And it really bugs me because back when we were in the US, we saw this happening then as well. We saw the Saudi influence happening then as well. And we kept saying, how is it Saudi Arabia has so much influence over the American government? Well, it's really easy to understand. You hire lobby organizations, you pump a lot of money into the economy, you buy real estate, you buy US bonds, you force the US to depend upon you. And at the end of the day, you're stuck there. And I come back to the same thing. I mean, if you look at Qatar right now, a lot of people just last year made a big deal about Qatar. Who's talking about Qatar now? Everyone's gone quiet about it because it was a news cycle. It ran through, it went quiet. unless you keep this in front of the American people, you keep hammering away, you're not going to see a resolution at the level you need to see. Because you have the opportunity right now to wipe out every single terror cell in the United States if the FBI becomes serious in doing their job.
Right. So, Chris, there was another cell in Sarasota, Florida, that this one's been reported on. That's where Muhammad Atta, who flew Flight 11 into my late husband's building, into the North Tower. So he was going in and out of a private home in a gated community, and they that family fled the country prior to 9/11, and they fled in a hurry. The food was still in the refrigerator, the garbage was still in the garbage cans. I mean, they were told get out, and they left. And they had children. The pumps were still going in the pool. All of that, cars were in the driveway. They just disappeared. And when they were told to leave, and they were a point of contact for Atta and his crew. Now we know through investigative reporting that there's 100,000 pages of FBI reports on that cell that we don't see. We're not allowed to have right now. Again, we have this very narrow jurisdictional discovery. So that's one area that we would be able to then in discovery, take a look at all of that. But what I've been told by the investigators of Operation Encore, that really the key lies in the San Diego cell. It lies in Bayumi's connections to Moya and through Mary's, but that the two that we know about from there have never been fully investigated, or we haven't seen what they know about them. It's Sudan and Sudari, the advanced team, the two that came over here right after the embassy bombings, and then laid out the track across the United States for the hijackers to get themselves from the West Coast to the East Coast. So there is a lot more there. There's a lot that, if discovery is ordered, we'll be able to even, I don't want to say, because I don't want to let them off the hook and say even if they only give us part of it, because no, that's never good enough. Give us everything that is not a threat to national security, and let us bring it into a courtroom, because that's what we are entitled to do, is bring the evidence into a courtroom, and it's not supposed to be withheld by your own government agencies.
Yeah, absolutely. Terry, can I show the page that's not public yet, but will be public soon for the petition?
Oh, it's public tonight. So yes.
Okay, I didn't realize it had gone
Yep.
public. Yep,
Yeah, we got it up and running. Yep.
Okay, so I can share the link with our audience?
Yes,
okay,
please do. Yes, I'll even say it out loud in a minute after this.
Okay, perfect. So
see that take action button right there.
There you go. So just go to 911familiesunited.org, click take action. Okay, got it. So I'll just read through the highlights on this. Nearly 3,000 murdered, nearly 25 years without the full truth. For nearly 25 years, victims, families, and survivors have asked who supported the hijackers and why is the truth still hidden. Evidence shows Saudi Arabia officials and agents were part of the support network in the United States, yet the FBI continues to withhold key records. A federal subpoena was issued in 2018. Executive Order 14040 required review and release. Those obligations have not been met. This is not a delay. It's a failure of transparency and accountability. We call on the FBI to release all remaining 9/11 records, fully comply with the 2018 subpoena and executive order, 14040, and end decades of delay. So again, I'll post this in the live chat, but it's easy enough to find. Who is this going to go to, Terry? Be somebody at
right,
all?
So this is the landing page that your viewers would see. Then when they go to sign the petition, they would see the actual letter, and that letter will go to the director of the FBI. And the only reason why I didn't put a name, to the director of the FBI, is because I'm probably not going to pull the trigger with this until a few months from now, and things change all the time. So I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying it will go to the director, because it will be a follow-up to that letter that we sent a year ago that I was talking to Bongino about at the memorial, and that I was talking to Patel about, with all of the misconduct and all of the categories of evidence we still need. So, I implore your viewers to please sign the petition and just help us put the pressure on the FBI to cooperate, and it'll benefit all of us in the long run when we can hold the kingdom accountable. And like I said, I hope set better policies and do a thorough examination of who they installed here 25 years ago, who might still be here, who they've rotated out and rotated in. There's so much that we should be doing that we're not doing. And I think that this lawsuit will help move all of that along.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it does for all of you as the families. I also hope that something comes out of this to either mitigate or prevent similar attacks, because we certainly have a ton of threats in that, vein against us right now. So I went ahead and signed it while you were speaking. So stand with the victims' family members and survivors, demand the truth, add your name. Thank you for adding your name. By signing, you are joining families, survivors, and fellow Americans calling for transparency and accountability regarding the September 11th attacks. Please consider sharing this letter with your friends and family by clicking here, and I will share it on our Substack, X, and other socials. The truth about September 11th belongs to the American people. To the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, we, the undersigned families of those murdered on September 11th, 2001, survivors of the attacks, and members of the American public committed to the FBI's mission to protect the American people, respectfully petition you to take immediate action to release long withheld records concerning the September 11th terrorist attacks and the support networks that enabled them. Nearly 3,000 innocent people were murdered on September 11th, 2001. For more than 2 decades, families and survivors have sought full transparency about how those attacks were carried out, who provided the assistance to the hijackers, and why critical evidence remains concealed. Evidence uncovered through civil litigation, investigative reporting, and government records demonstrates that the U.S.-based support networks, including individuals linked to foreign government entities, assisted the hijackers prior to the attacks, yet key FBI records remained hidden from the American people. And there's additional verbiage that goes with that, but hopefully that will get some traction. As I've shared a few times here on my podcast, Andrew Bailey is one of the best attorney generals probably in the history of our country. He's the former attorney general who sued the CCP for Charlie 19 damage to the Missouri economy. He sued them for $25 billion and won. Then he was granted by the court the ability to start seizing CCP-owned properties across the country. He started by seizing some high-rises in downtown San Francisco, but then he got asked to come to Washington, D.C. and be the co-executive director of the FBI many months before Dan Bongino stepped down, because Dan Bongino had said that he was going to leave. So he's now Patel's next in line, or next, in command. I personally think he should have been as the attorney general instead of Bondi, and he was on that short list. But I would bet a dime to a dollar in the not too distant future that Andrew Bailey will replace Kash Patel. Terry, you'll get a kick out of this. Khalid, what do you call Kash Patel again?
The youth-size yellow windbreaker.
So Khalid's got a great sense of humor. So with that being said, Khalid, looking at the domestic attack environment right now, the Michigan synagogue, Old Dominion University, the IED attempt outside of Gracie Mansion in New York City, what lessons from the 9/11 support network, like 9/11 1.0, that failures, what should every family be applying to their own security posture right now based on what we know so far from 9/11 1.0?
Well, if you've really studied 9/11 1.0, you understand that the government failed to investigate, and they failed to learn any lessons from what really happened on 9/11. When you look at what's going on right now, you're seeing a recreation of everything that happened before 9/11 at a scale of 1,000%. And again, the government has closed their eyes to it. They're not taking any action. They're very quietly saying, well, no, it's not real. It's not going to happen. This isn't going to go on. That's not going to go on. Now, all of a sudden, because of Iran, the FBI the other day put out a threat assessment, which is, if you read it, it's the biggest joke I have ever read in my entire life for an FBI to be putting out a threat assessment that is so non-specific. when you know, I mean, Chris, you and I on this podcast have discussed absolute details of how the sleeper cells are operating. And if you look at the FBI's notification, you go, are you even reading anything that's online? Are you even studying what the IRGC has said? You're seeing the exact same thing happen that happened before 9/11. People were raising alarms about things that were going on in their communities, and the FBI blew it off. And the whole reason of creating the Department of Homeland Security was so that all of these agencies could coordinate intelligence, and the coordination's still not happening. So when you talk about what the American people can do, open your eyes and start talking, start pointing out things that are out of place, things that should not be happening that are happening in your communities. Even if you can get it to somebody in law enforcement and get them to look into it, don't close your eyes to it, because you're the one that's going to suffer. You're the one that's going to take the brunt of this attack. As long as you keep believing the government is going to protect you, you're going to find out, you're going to be laid bare when the attacks happen.
Yeah, and I won't ask you to attest to how brutal this process has been for you, Terry, losing your husband and whatnot, but suffice it to say, I'm sure you wouldn't wish it on any other Americans.
No,
So,
no.
with that being said, just quickly, I'm not a big fan of Laura Loomer, not because of her politics or anything else. She has a horrible track record of taking credit for other people's work. And it kind of kills me that we started on, beating the drum on terrorism about 4.5 years ago, the domestic threat. Khalid's been doing it for a full career. And we have all these pundits coming out of the woodwork now saying, oh, there's 9/11 2.0, big terrorist threats and stuff, as if they're breaking some sort of news. But she sent out another, X post today, essentially saying that it's going to be 10 times worse than 9/11 1.0. And that certainly jives with Khalid's intelligence on this particular topic. So I'm going to take us into the fifth and final segment tonight. Terry's demands, full accountability, and what comes next. So as we've mentioned, Terry lost her husband, Tom, in the North Tower on September 11, 2001. And she's fought for 25 years on two fronts: the Saudi kingdom in the courts and the American government in the corridors of power. She's, had her access to FBI leadership opened, then cut off by someone inside the Bureau or higher. But she's never stopped. And categories of evidence the FBI still has not produced remain outstanding. The family's position is that Kash Patel and the current FBI leadership team have both the authority and the obligation to produce them now. The family's demands are not symbolic. Full accountability means a public trial with a complete evidentiary record entered into the federal record, financial damages that reflect what the kingdom's agents did to nearly 3,000 American families, extradition demands for Bayoumi and Thumari, who are both alive and free in Saudi Arabia, and a legal precedent that makes state-sponsored terrorism on U.S. soil terminally expensive for any foreign government willing to try it again. Saudi Arabia is currently appealing Judge Daniels' ruling to the Second Circuit and writing their rebuttal. This fight's not over, and the families need every American watching tonight, or if you're watching a recording of this, to understand that the petition to drive, to pressure, I should say, the FBI to cooperate, this is an action item that you can take right now. You don't have to wait on it, and you have a chance to add your voice to the pressure here, but exerting some pressure on them. So with that being said, as I mentioned, we're going to the fifth and final segment here. Terry, give me a synopsis of your message to Kash Patel. Like, if you had an audience with him for a matter of minutes, what would your succinct request be to him?
Just to please look at the 2018 subpoena and see where past FBI agencies have failed to cooperate, and fill in the gaps with the 2018 subpoena, and then take a look at the executive order from the Biden administration and do the same there. There are gaps. There is evidence that does not fall under the state secrets, and therefore they should be available to the public. They should be available to us. I do not, I'm just going to clarify a few things. I do not ask for extradition for Bayoumi Ouattara to be extradited. The kingdom does not have any extradition treaties with the United States. They don't have them with anyone. And this is a civil lawsuit. So it gets a little murky because it's not a criminal court. The court couldn't even demand them to be extradited for us. So that one is sometimes a little, some people want it, but I don't believe it's ever going to happen. So I don't ask for things I don't believe I can get. I do believe we can see more of this evidence, these phone records. There's very important phone records that have been withheld from us. The travel arrangements, and there's a lot of information about the advanced team that's been withheld from us. That it's full transparency, which I believe the accountability part of it is equals deterrence. Every nation needs to be put on notice when this trial happens, or when this gets to the point where would it ever be resolved before? I don't know. But be put on notice that you can be held accountable in a U.S. courtroom, and you can be penalized if you support designated terrorist organizations that carry out attacks on U.S. soil and harm Americans. And that way we can hopefully stem the flow of the money that's coming in and supporting all of this. And we, like I said, we can examine what took place before 9/11, during 9/11, and address all of it openly. And I think you'd have a better relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because it should be based on the truth. Right now it's based on lies.
Yeah. Terry, what this appeal that they've launched, the Second Circuit, what's the realistic time frame for that to run its course before actually getting this to a jury? Is it potentially going to happen before the 25th anniversary, or realistically is it after that?
No. The only thing we're hoping for could happen before the 25th anniversary is the oral arguments could come out, or could be. I don't even think they will, but that's the possibility there, which means that the appeal would, all of that has to be entered, would be over, right? There's 4 different things that are happening. We're only to 2, so 2 more are in the pipeline. They both have to be entered, their arguments, these rebuttals, and then the court sets up the oral arguments. So I don't know. Around the 25th anniversary would be fabulous if we had more concrete decisions from the courts. But when they take their time, and we think sometimes they're taking a long time, it's a good thing. It means they're being very thorough, and we're going to hope that this court, the appellate court, looks at all the evidence and they will uphold the original judge's decision. And believe me, he took a long time to make his decision, to make it ironclad when he wrote the decision. I don't think there's very much room for an appeal to be considered for the kingdom.
Yeah, that's great. So normally at this point in time, I would play a 4-second Carnival roar. They're one of our premier sponsors, but I don't think it's really appropriate tonight. I will mention that this is the Carnival practical payoff, which means, Terry, when we get to this stage of our podcast, we're always trying to come up with things that our audience can do. So typically it's one skill, one item, one mindset shift, but there's no skill really related to this topic tonight, but there is activities related to this. So I'll have you give us one activity or 2 activities that our fellow Americans can do to help 9/11 families.
Well, the first one would be to please, sign the petition, share the petition, be part of the solution and help us compel the FBI to fully cooperate. That's a very important thing you can do. And then, come back and visit the website periodically, because there will be updates on the case if you're interested. And there's always sometimes another call to action could come down the road, whether I'm back in DC working on legislation, or there's another agency that needs, to hear from the American people. The American people, when they're united and they have a united voice, we are the most powerful machine. We are more powerful than the government. We are more powerful than the Saudi Arabian government. We can achieve what we want to achieve if we're all united, rowing in the same direction. So just join us, please.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. My audience has heard this many times before, but I'm going to do it again because you're right. We are far more powerful than many Americans realize, even though we've taken a lot of hits in the past few decades. So if you had $1 million and you converted it to 1 million seconds, that would be the equivalent of 11 days of time. If you had $1 billion and you converted it to 1 billion seconds, that's 31.67 years. These are numbers we can relate to, right? But if you had $1 trillion and you convert to 1 trillion seconds, it's 31,667 years, a number that none of us can really get our heads wrapped around. When the final numbers are tallied up for 2025, our GDP will be around $33 trillion. The Chinese said they were going to hit 19 trillion. They're in an economic tailspin. They will be lucky to hit 15 trillion in our money for 2025 GDP. If you take the 15 and the 33 and take the difference of 18 trillion, it's over 500,000 years difference in the size of our economy and theirs. Take the next step down is Germany is 4.5 trillion. Then you've got about 10 countries that are in the 3.5 trillion and another 10 that are 2.5 trillion. We are an order of magnitude larger than any country in the world as far as wealth and sophistication is concerned. So I don't think a lot of Americans just grasp the enormity of what we have behind us versus other countries. So we're absolutely way more powerful than Saudi Arabia is or ever will be. Khalid, give me a mindset shift for our audience on this topic.
Well, I think the biggest mindset shift that people need to get to is to understand that 9/11 is not a conspiracy theory. The story that we've been sold by the government is not true. And the number of people trying to open your eyes to the fact of what really happened, you need to start paying attention and start actually thinking about the possibility of that happening. The show tonight should be an eye opener for anyone who has been thinking that, well, this was just, 19 hijackers that carried out an attack. To carry out an attack of this level is impossible for individuals. This takes a massive organization. It takes massive infrastructure behind them to do it. And there have been so many red flags raised over the years, but no one has decided or believed to step out of the conspiracy theory idea. Tonight should be the nail in the coffin for conspiracy theories. Start asking the questions, start doing the research, start understanding that what you've been sold is a lie. The 9/11 Commission report is a lie. They did not come out and say what really happened on that day. Um, the biggest problem America's had is that, it's easier to just accept what the government says and move on. But because of that, the attacks get worse. The attacks get worse. The attacks get worse. And you end up losing more civil liberties because of it. Because 9/11 gave us, the Patriot Act, where we lost all kinds of civil liberties. It didn't make America safer. And that's what we need to understand, that you want to take more power from us, but you're not making us safer in the process. So for every American, the only thing I would say is stop using the word conspiracy theory and start using your brains. Start looking at things logically and figure out what's really happening, because no one's ever told you the truth, and you need to figure out the truth on your own.
Yeah, seek good information. So I'm going to give y'all the item for tonight. So unfortunately, when the next attacks occur in the homeland here, we will see cell phone networks jammed up. So without any cyber attacks, just the sheer volume of calls in multiple cities will crush it. So as far as having an emergency or SHTF comms plan is concerned, you can pretty much count on your cell phone being, completely useless. So a communications plan needs to have multiple layers to it. There's an old adage in the prepper community: 3 is 2, 2 is 1, 1 is none. I can hear JP laughing right now because he's saying in Chris's world, it's 100 is 99, 99 is 98, and so on. But just a couple quick things. The Garmin InReach Mini 3 is out now. This is the Mini 2. So up until a few months ago, they sold for $400 a piece. You can now get them as low as $250 to $300. And I recommend this over the Mini 3, which is $500, because the Mini 3 does pictures and other stuff that, it's nice to have, but it's not something you necessarily need for SHTF comms. Whereas these guys, and you can get the inReach messengers as well for another $50 or so less. This tethers to your phone. You can send text messages. It goes up to an Iridium satellite, down to a NOC, a network operation center, goes to the person you're trying to communicate with. They answer it. It comes back to the NOC, goes up to the Iridium satellite, comes down to your Mini, which is tethered to your phone. Unless all of the Iridium satellites went down, this is a really good tool. And as you can see, it's really, really small. And I keep a carabiner on it because when we're especially off grid, I just hook it to my belt loop sort of thing. Another layer of comms would be the POC-Link radios. So if you go to survivaldispatch.news, our Substack, you'll find a bunch of links. There's 2 different models. This is the Pro. The ones with the blue button are the Ultras. This guy allows you to communicate over any Wi-Fi internet connection, whether it's Starlink or something else. And it also allows you to communicate over the 4G network. So I come from high tech. I've done a ton of work in the telephony industry. 4G and 5G networks are not always joined together. As a matter of fact, probably 50% of the time they're not, which means that if a 5G network is taken down by cyber attacks, there's a decent chance that the 4G network is still up and running. Your smartphone consumes so much bandwidth that when you get kicked off of 5G back to 4G on your phone, you can't upload, download images half the time because it just doesn't have the bandwidth. These guys from POC-Link do an amazing job of compressing the audio and work really, really well over 4G, which is also called LTE, long-term evolution. And again, there's links for both these. If you just go to survivaldispatch.news, scroll down on the right-hand side, you'll see a list of sponsors. You'll see POC-Link Ultra ones, and you'll see POC-Link Pro ones, which is this one. And I've told this story before. It takes 2 seconds. Marin County, which is south side of the Bay Area, San Francisco. A few months back, 9/11 went down. Not unusual for that county. That gets shunted off to surrounding counties. But all 3 major carriers went down, but internet stayed up for many people. This type of device that communicates over Wi-Fi, of course, which has to have a route to the internet, would have been a perfect tool for communicating on. Right now, if you buy the Pros, you get a 3-year SIM card. So in other words, you could be anywhere in the world and use your POC-Link radio and be able to communicate with your group. And if you're a Survival Dispatch Guardian, you can sign up at survivaldispatch.news. You get put into one of our SHTF alerts groups. Even if your radio's out of range or you didn't have it on you, when we send out SDN's alert, Survival Dispatch Emergency Notification System, it goes to your email, it goes to our Substack, it goes to the SDN's channel on our Element server for our community. It goes to the POC-Link radios. Wrong orange one. The POC-Link radios and the smartphone app for the POC-Links, and it gets recorded in that. We've only sent out several SDN's emergencies because the bottom line is, unless American lives are potentially at risk, we don't send out SHTF alerts so that when you do get them, it means something. But again, if you sign up as a Guardian, survivaldispatch.news, you get that. You get the fellowship of our community. You get, right now, we're averaging about 15,000 messages per week on that Element server, which is why I created 20 different channels, because when they were all in one channel or a handful of channels, it was like looking for a needle in a stack of needles. So get your comms stuff in gear is my advice. And that basically covers the main topic. Terry, I appreciate if you would stay in touch with us. If you have any updates, we'd love to have you back, even if it's for a shorter period of time, to update our audience. This stuff is pretty key to the mission, the Survival Dispatch mission. Let me get you up a little bit bigger. There we go. So would love to hear of any updates or anything that we can do. If my friend Andrew Bailey ends up the FBI director, he could become your new best friend. His chief of staff, James Lawson's a personal friend of mine. So knock on wood, hopefully that unfolds. Other than that, quick shout out to our premier sponsor, Carnivalt, carnivalt.com. If you sign up for a subscription, send your email receipt, support survivaldispatch.com. You get a free Survival Dispatch News Guardians membership. And I'd love to show y'all some Wasatch Wagyu jerky. But as y'all know, Mike Glover and I were in a special therapy group because we're addicted to this stuff. It's like crack cocaine. wasatchwagyu.com. I'll put the links in the live chat with the discount SD20. I think that's it, unless you have any parting words, Terry. By all means, do so if you have anything you'd like to add.
I don't think so. Just thank you so much for this opportunity to share all of this with you and your viewers. And obviously we're all patriots. We all love this country, and we can all make a difference. So just thank you very much.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Terry. I appreciate the insight. We've all learned something, from you tonight. Khalid, do you have any parting words before we? I'm going to forewarn y'all. Make sure you got a box of tissues around, or nobody's going to make fun of you for shedding a tear. Closing video tonight is absolutely brutal. I've sent it to a few people already today, and that's the effect that it had. Khalid, do you want to add anything?
I come back to the very simple thing. I mean, stop believing what you're being told. We've been lied to by every government in the world. Lies to its people, and it's the responsibility of the people to understand where the truth is and finding the truth themselves. Stop thinking conspiracy theory. Figure out what's really happening and figure out where you're being lied to, because your safety is at risk.
True story. True story. All right. So God bless our law enforcement officers. God bless our military. God bless America.
Okay.
Good luck getting through this closing video. Thank you very much.